Hello everyone, and welcome back to Days Out. And today I brought you to a museum in one of Britain's oldest railway towns. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Locomotion at Shildon. Shildon lies between Bishop Auckland and Darlington, with Locomotion on the site of the old wagon works. The first workshop at Shildon was opened by the Stockton and Darlington and later converted into a wagon works. It later passed to the Northeastern, LNER and BR's Northeastern region. BR modernised the works in 1962 and again in 1972. In 1975 it hosted the Rail 150 celebrations, closing in 1984. In 2004 an £11.3 million museum opened as a subsidiary to the National Railway Museum at York, housing some of the collection as well as other items from private owners. Locomotion has two halls, the first from 2004 focusing on passenger traffic. The first railway coaches were actually based on old stagecoaches with the luggage mounted on the roof as well as the guard who had to jump down to apply the brakes. Number 59 has three compartments with first class in the middle and two second class compartments either side. Another example of a horse-drawn carriage is this dandy car used on the Port Carlisle branch in Cumbria from 1861 to 1914. Although the bicentenary of the Liverpool and Manchester is 5 years away, here at Shildon they've got two of the participants from the Rainhill trials. To our left is Sans Pareil of the old order with its flue boiler and horizontal beam engine type cylinders. And on our right is Rocket, the revolution in new locomotive technology with its multi-tube boiler, glass pipe and angled cylinders. By the 1880s, Britain had some of the highest train speeds in the world, leading to a series of races in 1888. The races between the east and west coast routes to Scotland took around 6.5 hours, with average speeds of 50 miles per hour. By 1895, the races reached Aberdeen, with the west coast route at 540 miles taking 8 hours 32 minutes, averaging 63.3 miles per hour with 70 tonnes. The east coast route, however, was shorter at 523.5 miles, but took longer at 8 hours 38 minutes, averaging 60 miles per hour, but with an increased weight of 120 tonnes. Representing the West Coast Main Line is number 790 Hardwick of 1892. She's an improved precedent class introduced by Webb in 1887 and during the races ran 141 miles from Crewe to Carlisle at an average speed of 67.2 miles per hour. The Northeastern's contribution to the races were 20 of these M1 class 440s designed by Wilson Worsdale in 1892. Later, the class was fitted with superheaters, with this example, number 1621, averaging 61.5 miles per hour between York and Newcastle. To try and speed up journey times, the competing companies formed joint stocks, the idea being that instead of passengers changing whole trains, only the locomotive would be changed. On the west coast, the joint stock consisted of the LNWR and the Caledonian, represented by this restaurant car, number 200. It was later used for the Royal Train from 1904 to 56. The East Coast joint stock, meanwhile, consisted of the Great Northern, North Eastern and North British Railways, represented by Third Corridor, number 12, and it really does show how far third-class travel had come by the 1890s. 1923 saw the formation of the Big Four, who used steel-bodied coaches, with the exception of the LNER, who used teak. LMS number 5987 is a corridor third brake and dates from 1937. Also from the LMS we have Black 5 number 5000. Now there's an interesting story behind this locomotive because she was due to be the class prototype. However, the crew order was delayed by 6 months and the Vulcan Foundry actually got theirs out first. So in preservation, number 5000 is the second oldest. The oldest is actually the Strathspey's number 5025. When it was created, the LMS inherited a vast network with huge volumes of traffic. Its only mixed traffic class was the Hughes Fowler Crab, so Stanier, who had come from Swindon, took inspiration from the GWR halls. Known as the Black 5, the new design had a 225 pounds PSI boiler, 18.5 by 28-inch cylinders, 6-foot wheels and a tractive effort of 25,455 pounds. The first 50 came straight from the drawing board and soon more orders followed. This included 227 from Armstrong Whitworth, the largest ever order given to a private firm. Stanley's predecessor Ivard made some changes such as roller bearings, caprotti valve gear and double chimneys. A one-off example was number 44767, fitted with Stephenson Locomotion. The Black 5s were an instant success, with 842 being built, the last appearing in 1951 and forming the basis for BR's own 5MT. The last examples survived right to the end of steam on BR in 1968, and 18 have been preserved. In the south of England, a large electrified commuter network had been built up, started by the LBSCR in 1909 from Victoria to London Bridge via Denmark Hill. Using 6,700 volts DC overhead wires, the network was extended to Crystal Palace, Peckham Rye and Tulse Hill in 1911. The LSWR started their programme in 1915, using 660 volt DC third rail to Wimbledon, Richmond and Shepperton. Expansion of the third rail was continued by the Southern from 1926 to Windsor, Guildford, Gravesend and Brighton, with the LBSCR lines being converted to third rail. Eastbourne was reached in 1935, followed by Portsmouth in 1937 and Medway in 1939. After the war, BR continued the programme, with the Kent coast being completed in 1961 and to Bournemouth in 1967, with the whole project being finished by the 70s. Representing this period in railway technology is the 2 bill. Now the name derives from the fact that it has 2 coaches with facilities, the name literally meaning by lavatory. 152 units were constructed between 1935 and 38. Another commuter network was from Liverpool Street, the first part of the Great Eastern Main Line to be electrified. The Class 306 was a pre-war design, a collaboration between the Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company and Metropolitan Camel. Using 1,500 volt DC overhead wires, the order was placed in 1938, but wasn't completed until 1949. A new feature of the unit were the sliding doors, operated by either the guard or passengers. In 1955, British Railways announced their modernisation plan, which led to the introduction of a number of experimental diesel locomotives. This is one of them, Deltic, from English Electric, and she's given the name by the fact that she is powered by 2 Napier Deltic engines. She was the prototype of a class of eventually 22 locomotives introduced in 1961. As more and more diesel locomotives appeared, British Railways started to categorise them based on power output, with the Type 4s rated at 2,000 to 2,700 horsepower. D200 is the first of the English Electric Type 4s, or Class 40s, introduced in 1958. The first batch worked on the Great Eastern Main Line, and eventually 190 locomotives were built, coming from the Vulcan Foundry of Robert Stephenson at Hawthorne. After its creation, British Railways also inherited 3 electric locomotives from the Southern Railway, which uniquely used overhead wires and third rail. However, with the planning of the electrification of the Kent Coast Main Line, 24 of these Class 71s were ordered in 1958, but uniquely, they didn't come from the Southern Railway workshop. Instead, they came from Doncaster. At the same time, modern coaching stock started to appear in the form of the Mark I, the first appearing in 1951, and eventually there were 33 types of these coaches. The last appeared in 1961, and they came from 6 workshops and 2 contractors, with this example coming from Derby. In later years, changes were made, mainly in the form of the vacuum brakes being swapped for air brakes and the steam heating swapped to electric train heating. 2025 also marks 60 years since the funeral train of the wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill, which was hauled by his namesake locomotive, Battle of Britain number 34051. The train ran from Waterloo to Hamborough, the nearest station to his palace at Glenelg, via Oxford. Now, the original plan was to give him the Royal Train head code. However, this was switched to his more familiar V sign, which they got special permission for, as that symbol actually means breakdown train.
The 70s saw a revolutionary new train, the APT, designed by the Railway Technical Centre at Derby. This 4-coach set had the ability to tilt, allowing for higher speeds on existing track. It was tested on the Western region until 1976.
By the 70s though, the railways were still losing out to the motorways, so the Railway Technical Centre at Derby came up with a revolution and one of the most iconic locomotives in railway history, the HST. The prototype was built at Crewe and tested on the Western region between 1972 and 76. Production of the HST proper started in 1975. With the 197 power cars being outshot, the last appearing in 1982. 43102 emerged from Crewe in 1980 and holds the world record for diesel traction at 148.5 miles per hour, set on the 1st of November 1987.
For branch lines, a series of rail buses were developed during the 1960s. This culminated in LEV 1, a joint venture between BIOS Research Division and British Leyland, consisting of a national bus body on a 4-wheeled chassis. The result of LEV 1 was the Pacer, with the Class 142 appearing in 1985. These had a wider body than earlier examples and were used on branch lines and in urban areas, with the last going in 2019. The second hall at Locomotion, opened in 2024, is dedicated to freight traffic, and in this part of the video I'll be focusing on coal, the main source of industry in the North East.
Eaton Lloyd was designed to take coal from Eaton Colliery down to the River Wear and was withdrawn in 1912, being placed into the LNER's Railway Museum at York in 1927. Now, she was thought to date from 1822, however, following a recent archaeological survey, she's actually been found to date from 1857. Some of the oldest wagons here at Shildon are these cauldrons, which date to the earliest days of the railways and were once a common sight in the North East. Now, a cauldron actually refers to a measurement of coal, with the Newcastle cauldron weighing 2.7 tonnes. And remarkably, some of these wagons were still in use into the 1950s. Following the takeover of smaller railways, the North Eastern had a virtual monopoly in this part of the world, and to help with their coal trade, they introduced these, the 20-tonne P7s, 17,000 of which were built at Shildon. Now, the idea of these wagons was threefold. Firstly, it reduced the complications of returning private owner wagons to a certain location. 2, it allowed coal to be sold from stations, and 3, it allowed merchants to lease station facilities.
Like the LBSCR and LSWR, the North Eastern developed its own electrified urban network around Newcastle in 1904. It ran for 30 miles, connecting Wallsend, Heaton, Backworth and Percy Main. Alongside was a freight-only line from Trafalgar Yard in Manners to Newcastle Quayside. The route had tunnels and steep gradients, opening in 1905. 1914 saw a new route from Shildon to Newport near Middlesbrough, worked by 10 Bobo locomotives from Siemens, powered by 4 275 horsepower traction motors. After the First World War, the North Eastern laid out plans to electrify the East Coast Main Line between York and Newcastle. In preparation for this, a locomotive with a 2-co-2 arrangement, number 13, was constructed, but the plans were dropped by the LNER in 1923. Number 13 then became a showpiece, whilst the Newport line was de-electrified in 1935 and its locos placed into storage. However, number 11 was rebuilt as a banker for use on the Woodhead route, classified EB1. Classifications came after the war, with Newcastle's becoming ES1, the Newport's EF1 and number 13 EE1, which was withdrawn in 1950. The EF1s went in 1951, but the ES1s survived until 1964, along with number 11, now a departmental shunter at Ilford.
Number 1 was built in 1905, one of two for the Quayside branch in a collaboration between Brush and British Thomson Houston. Fitted with a pantograph and third rail shoes, she was withdrawn in 1964. At the start of this series, some of you may remember that we saw the Q6 on the North Yorkshire moors. Well, 901 is effectively its bigger brother, a 3-cylinder Q7, 15 of which were constructed, 5 by the North Eastern and 10 by the LNER. The Q7's main work was on the concept iron ore trains, until being replaced by the BR9Fs. 49395 is one of a series of 080s built for the LNWR, emerging from Crewe in 1921. Withdrawn in 1959, she was displayed at Ironbridge and restored by Pete Waterman.
The story of LNWR 080s starts with number 2524 of 1892. This led to Webb's 3-cylinder compounds, the A-class of 1893 and the 4-cylinder B-class compounds of 1901. George Whale made 2 contributions, the first the C-class in 1904 being some of the A's rebuilt as simples. His second, the D's, were more A rebuilds with a larger heating surface. He also rebuilt the B's as 280s, classes E and F. Bowen Cook rebuilt 32 of the Bs in 1910 to create the G-class, which also included 60 new builds. The G1s of 1912 had superheaters, with 170 new builds and 279 rebuilds. His predecessor Beams introduced the 60 G2s, also with superheaters, in 1921. The final chapter in the LNWR 080 story came in 1935, when Stanier fitted the G1s with a higher boiler pressure, creating the G2As. In total, 320 080s passed into BR ownership, the last being withdrawn in 1964.
Up until the Second World War, most wagons were made of wood. However, after the war, new steel types, such as this 16-tonner example, appeared. And effectively, what they did is they became a standard type of wagon for British railways, and as well as coal, could be used for other minerals such as iron ore. This frame belongs to a much larger 21-ton hopper, the first of which was introduced in 1936. Now, originally these had a wooden body, but later this was replaced by a welded steel body. Now, these plates here are actually quite interesting. They're known as wrapping plates, and what they do is they help to loosen the coal in cold or damp weather. To handle all of the coal and other freight, there were once hundreds of yards up and down the country, all worked by small shunting engines. But in 1944, the LNS went one step further and produced a 350 horsepower diesel shunter. 13079 is what became known as the Class 08, of which over 1,000 were built between 1952 and 1962.
Industrial firms also built diesel shunters as the new era dawned. H001 was outshot by Sentinel in 1959 for the Bass Brewery and later worked for the Central Electricity Generating Board.
In 1964, a revolutionary new wagon appeared. These, the HAA, MGR or merry-go-rounds, 11,000 of which came from Shildon Works. With a capacity of 32.5 tonnes, the idea is that they can load and unload coal while staying in motion.
The MGR was followed by the HEA with a capacity of 32 tonnes. This example was the first built, emerging from Shildon in 1977. As the railways headed into the new millennium, new high-capacity wagons appeared, such as this 100-tonne HTA from Thrull Europa in York.
So that was our visit to Locomotion at Shildon. Hope you've all enjoyed the video, and don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. Now, the whole reason for coming to the North East was to celebrate Rail 200 and the bicentenary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. And to mark this landmark anniversary, I've come up with something a little bit special. So, hope you guys can join me for that one, and I'll see you all on the next day out. Bye for now.